So I'm Dr. Elise Assaf, she, her pronouns, and what was the third question? My affiliation with what? There was another one in between there.
Yeah, your affiliation with the university. So, like, what's your official title? And then,
So I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Communications. Um, I am tenure track faculty member.
okay, awesome. And then, so kind of just generally speaking, before we get into the questions, do you want to provide a very brief synopsis of your research, specifically the one that we're focusing on today, which would be your dissertation?
Yeah, so my background is in communications, specifically public relations. And so prior to my doctorate and my doctoral program, I looked very specifically at mass media representations. I started the I started my thesis looking at sports. And so like sports research was actually really interesting to me. There, I considered going into sports media for a time. And then when I decided that I wanted to stick with academia, I was working in PR outside of teaching as an adjunct. And so I was looking for programs, determined that the education program at Chapman was the route I should take. There are not a ton of mass media communications programs here on the West Coast, and I wasn't willing to move. So I thought going into education would be beneficial. It would help me learn how to teach students. So went through that. In that process, because I didn't have an education background, I had to kind of fast forward through a lot of research and learn a lot of things in a short period of time. I ended up doing the concentration. They call them emphasis, but same concept. So my concentration was in disability studies, and there's it could be a long discussion on the difference between special education and disability studies, but basically abbreviated version, disability studies looks at you wanting students to be included in the classroom as opposed to separating students into like a special education classroom. And I thought it was just a really interesting way of looking at things. And there were a number of people in my cohort who were looking more at physical disabilities. Autism was really common for people to be looking at. I was more interested in mental health. I've shared this with my students in the past that I have been diagnosed with various mental health diagnoses, anxiety, depression. A number of my family members have as well. And then my younger brother is schizoaffective. And so when he was going through like his diagnosis process, there were a lot of different diagnoses and labels that were placed on him. And so in that process, like learning about what people's perceptions of someone with schizophrenia or schizoaffective was eye-opening. And so there were a lot of people that would ask, like, is he dangerous? Like, what does he have voices in his head? And like those stereotypes, I think, that you see in film and TV and communicated on other platforms. And so I decided to combine all of that and now look at representations of mental health in mass media.
Awesome. Well, you perfectly answered my first question because I was going to ask what inspired you to start the research. So, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. So to kind of give us more further knowledge of your familiarity with the topic, is there one experience or scenario that kind of, that you can discuss or that you feel comfortable sharing that like really inspired you to be like, this is something that I want to take on for my dissertation and my thesis?
Um, so a dissertation is kind of a unique situation in that there are certain guidelines that you have to follow. And so I don't know, while I found the topic interesting, it definitely got changed throughout the process because my committee wanted to see certain things and they thought that it was like important to follow up with certain avenues of the research as opposed to maybe what I would have focused on. And that's just, whenever you have a committee, you need to follow what they're suggesting, because they're the ones that are going to pass or fail you and get you to graduate. So in that sense, you know, I was very much guided by what they thought was beneficial. For example, the study looks at 3 major newspapers in the United States. Initially, I wanted to include the LA Times, but the one of the committee members, her husband was the health reporter for the LA Times. And so that would have been a conflict of interest, and I would not have been able to use her as a committee member. And at the time, I was already struggling to find committee members that made sense for my research. So, so yeah, so that, like, in that sense, it had to be amended. In terms of what spurred the research, the initial idea, I did a pilot study for a course, and it looked at headlines. And in that process, I discovered a study that showed that 6 out of 10 people don't read beyond a headline. And so it made me realize how important or how impactful the language in a headline can be in perpetuating stereotypes. And so that was a pilot study, and kind of several research projects have grown from that idea.
But have you seen any other like research done since your publication that's kind of been similar to yours, or would you say that most of it has been through like the social media kind of gaze?
Honestly, I haven't kept up a ton with that area of research for a couple of reasons. One, because I am done with the like dissertation process, I have started to like look into other types of research or other areas of research now that I have a little bit more flexibility. And then the other thing is that like my commitments with being a tenure track faculty member they've just changed. I haven't been able to do as much research as I wanted to do. There's like a teaching and service requirements for my job now that factor into like what time I have to conduct it. So I haven't really looked into it to see what other research is out there on the topic.
Okay. Well, my last question is just in general, what advice would you give to people who are consuming the like media through newspapers, social media, and give them advice in regards to like any like misinformation that could be spread towards them? How could they avoid that?
So I teach it in a couple of my classes, and I think that there is a big focus on like content related to digital or to media literacy. And so, there's actually a textbook that I use for COMM 446 has like this 10-step way of determining if something is quote unquote fake news. And so, you want to make sure that it's coming from a trusted publication, that where is that journalist or staff member getting their information from? Are they quoting it from reputable sources? More often than not, they are. Dom, don't worry, I'm not like bashing journalists. But like, there's just so much content online now. And you have a lot of people who have become pseudo journalists and are now putting information on like blogs and social media platforms and all of that stuff. And so making sure that you're very cognizant of who is putting that information out, where they're getting their information from, and the language that's being used. Is it language that is intended to become shared a bunch of times, and so there's a lot of like hyperbole and like heightened language that would cause a reaction and an emotional response, or is it like the straight information that we as consumers maybe should be getting?